Alright, now that we have talked about the case of, our ex-transport minister, Mr. Iswaran, continuing on the topic of transport, we're gonna talk about the whole SimplyGo fiasco that occurred in the past week. So, just a whole bunch of major gaffes in the past week for Singapore, I guess. So, here we go. I think this was 3 days ago, or at least as of filming this video, because today is the 25th, as of filming this. Right, 3 days ago, it was announced that commuters in Singapore no longer had to switch to SimplyGo. So, I guess for some context here, for Singaporeans, it should be quite clear. But in case there are international viewers, right? Singapore has a system, or used to be had, but now has a system called EZ-Link card, and essentially it's a public transport card, as with most systems in the world. And this was a huge innovation for us when it was first rolled out, I think, in the early noughties. I can't remember which year exactly. What I can recall is that even when I was in primary school in the early noughties, we were already using the EZ-Link card system. So things like that, right? I'm gonna cover some details here. It kind of looks like this. Don't know if it's showing in the camera here, but essentially what you do is you top up, using a bank card or using cash, right? And that would serve as your ticket, I guess, on the public transport. So on buses, on the MRT, right, mass rapid transit, or the equivalent of a subway system, I guess, except it doesn't just go underground, or rather equivalent of a metro system. And yeah, so how it used to work, right, was that whenever you tapped in or you tapped out of the public transport, it shows a balance, right? How much you have left on your card and how much has been spent in that particular trip. And there was an announcement late last week, right, that Singapore was looking to transition away from that and going to this system called SimplyGo. So this is where I guess it gets a little bit more confusing, even for Singaporeans, because the thing is that due to the rapid digitalization of many services in Singapore in the past, in the past several years, we have essentially made it such that we have digital identity cards now, even though our main ICs, identity cards, are still very important. And when it comes to the EZ-Link card itself, you would be able to top up, through the app, right? So basically, they would use I can't remember what the antenna is called. They'll ask you to scan your card against your phone, and then afterwards, you can top up using any of the available fintech apps, typically through this app called DBS PayLah, or you can use a credit card or debit card to top up directly on your phone without having to, make the trip down to the interchanges, the bus interchanges, or the MRT stations to go and top up your EZ-Link card, right? But SimplyGo in itself, what it does is that it basically does the same thing, except you don't need to keep scanning your card against your phone, which is kind of strange, because essentially what that means is that it becomes an online EZ-Link of sorts, right? But you still need an existing SimplyGo card to go and get it done. And it's just, how do I put this, innovation and trying to use technology to cut corners where it's not really needed, right? And that will be fine, because people have obviously have different preferences, right? Some may prefer to just go entirely digital, and some may still feel more comfortable with having a physical card in place. The problem was that the SimplyGo card, right? The new system that the government tried to make mandatory for all citizens to transition to by 1st of June initially, was that number one, right? The card itself, the SimplyGo card, does not display your card balance. All it does essentially is that it would show a SimplyGo logo. So, for instance, if let's say, I'm not sure if there are any images that demonstrate that, but let's say we tap, this EasyLink card scanner on the bus, right? We are taking the bus, and then we get on, and then we want to tap in to basically pay for our fares. This is what it would show. So typically what it does is it would show how much you have left on your EasyLink card in the bottom box over here. But SimplyGo cards, they'll just reveal SimplyGo. And if you want to check your balance, you have to constantly log into your application to check that. So that proved to be a huge, source of friction for many Singaporean commuters, and most of us commute because, our public transport system, compared to what it was a decade ago, is much more efficient nowadays. So if we just tap in without having any of the balance showing, then it becomes very difficult to keep track of our finances. So that was the rationale for many of the commuters that were traveling. Second thing, which was just, I don't know why, but the thing about the EasyLink card, ever since it was first introduced, was that many other features have since been added on to it, right? So as you can see here, CNA has done a great job compiling this particular graphic, right? The idea is that the old EasyLink cards, okay, could be used to pay for public transport, retail, and motoring. What that means, in short, is that if you want to use your EasyLink card to do some of your shopping, right, in shops that actually support this function, you can pay for it there. Obviously for public transport, and for motoring, it's for the ERP system. Essentially paying for road tolls, but using a card, in the IU scanner on your cars. And when you drive past the gantry, it will scan whatever IU that's there, and then your EasyLink card will be, whatever balance that you, let me rephrase that, however much you need to pay for the road tolls will be deducted from your EasyLink card's balance. Now, of course, there are various EasyLink cards as well, right? Or rather, other card types like your FlashPay card. Basically, it's a debit card of sorts, but you can also use it for various other functions, right? And a contactless bank card as well. So your credit cards and your debit cards. The Nets FlashPay is basically sort of like a cash card as well. So the thing is that because of all these upgrades over the past decade, or even 20 years, I guess, many Singaporeans have already become accustomed to simply keeping one or two cards that would serve a huge variety of purposes. So your EasyLink card for public transport and paying for, if let's say you're a driver, right, paying for your road tolls, and then your Nets FlashPay card typically is used for, parking or driving or even shopping and all that. So many Singaporeans would just collapse these two into one card, right? And then, of course, they'll keep a credit card or a debit card on its own for other bigger, bigger ticket item spending, right? What SimplyGo did, or rather what the announcement of the transition did, was that essentially this non-upgraded EZ-Link card will be entirely phased out, and every Singaporean had to get one of these SimplyGo EZ-Link card, which no longer allows for use in motoring, i.e. you can't use it for parking, you can't use it to pay for road tolls. And that raised a huge stink among the Singaporeans, and unsurprisingly, because what this meant is that for many Singaporeans, they had to go out deliberately just to get another card because their old EZ-Link card would not be working. Number two, right, this has huge implications for the population as a whole, because how do I put this? We are facing a situation of aging population, right? And the older generation, when the EZ-Link card was first introduced, right, it took them quite long to get accustomed to using that, because in the past what they would do is they would simply tell the bus driver where they wanted to go, and they'll tell the conductor where they wanted to go, and then they'll pay however much it costs, for the bus fare, like in many systems in the world, right? But with the introduction of EZ-Link card, it made it quite difficult for the elderly to go and get accustomed to this system, right? And then, of course, when SimplyGo was first launched in 2019, the MRT stations and the bus interchanges all over Singapore reduced the amount of ticketing machines. So what do I mean by that? In the past, right? In the past, in Singapore, you would see plenty of such things here. Let me just show you real quick. You can purchase tickets in this way, right? So one-off tickets to travel between stations. So typically Singaporeans wouldn't use that. That would mostly be reserved for tourists. And of course, you have all these facilities in place to top up your EZ-Link card, right? So to add on to whatever balance there is left on the card itself. And the thing is that we then transitioned to this, right? The buttons were essentially gone, and it was all touch screen. And never mind the fact that we transitioned to kiosks like that, they reduced the number of kiosks as well. So perhaps in the past it may look something like this, 3 to 6 per station. Then they would reduce it to 2 or even 4 at most. So the elderly, I shouldn't call them old people. The elderly already found it difficult, to sort of transition to a more digital, I guess, style of, adding on to your card balance. Of course, for the younger generation who are much more tech savvy, this wasn't an issue at all. But for the elderly, it certainly is, right? And of course, the way that the elderly would budget, right, simply specifically in terms of the tools that they use, would be vastly different from the younger generation. So when the government was attempting to get the entire country to transition to SimplyGo, it basically caused the elderly to be left behind, right? And so there was plenty of debate about this, and in the earlier part of this episode, we talked about optics, right? Yeah, this certainly is yet another crap storm that the PAP has to endure. It doesn't help that, many of the state media channels, okay, I shouldn't call them state media, they are technically privatized, but, in Singapore, let's not get into that here, there's plenty to unpack there. They have been interviewing, many experts regarding this decision, and Some of them even said something like, hey, the most of us are not low income citizens, which I guess is somewhat true. So, when it comes to spending on public transport, it just doesn't really matter in terms of whether or not the balance can be shown. But that's certainly not the case, is it? Because clearly, especially in the context of rising costs of living, we want to see how much we are spending on our public transport. So, yeah, that's the whole story, right? And the backlash was so huge that you get, columns like these, right? Which, when I first read it, oh my god, I was laughing for 5 minutes straight. Neil Humphreys, writing that, hey, the LTA, right? They decided to remove our transit cards balance display at the point of transaction, right? And I've been loving the techie jargon throughout. If we are discussing the climactic act of love making in Singapore, we'll call it the point of transaction. Oh god. Okay, right. So yeah, it's very, very sarcastic, right? Obviously dripping with a ton of, derision, I guess that's how you pronounce it. And of course, very, very caustic humor, right? But in a way it's true. Cause why fix something that ain't broken, It's kind of like when you go and watch, all the various videos on failed startups, tech startups, right? And all the attempts to innovate something that really doesn't really require further innovation. Sort of like, hey, if you want to innovate this pen, how about let's not make it a sort of like cylindrical shape but a triangle shape sort of thing. Why would we need to do that? So in the case of SimplyGo, it just was a case of head scratching decisions. Like why do we need to do something like this? The old system works fine, right? And furthermore you give people a choice. Because for those that want to continue using SimplyGo, they can do so, right? They can simply go do so. Okay, that was a bad pun, right? But yeah, you get what I mean. And for those who are comfortable with the old system, just keep it that way, So, in light of all this backlash, right, the government, unsurprisingly, did a U-turn, so they took a page out of Liz Truss's book, right? Sure, that was an unnecessary low blow, but hey, yeah, and they decided to stop this transition, right? And the thing is that, as you can see here, the government will spend an additional $40 million to ensure that commuters can continue to use the EZ-Link cards and NETS Flash Pay cards if they wish to. So why? Right? And then you're going to spend an additional $40 million of taxpayers' money, which could have gone into the coffers, as you said, because, hey, the government has said that we have spent a lot of money from the past reserves, to hedge against all the COVID issues from 3 years ago, right? And then you're telling the citizens that, hey, we got to increase VAT or GST by 1% 2 years in a row. So it was increased from 7 to 8% last year, and then this year it increased to 9%. And you're gonna say, hey, we are forcing everybody to do something that's entirely unnecessary. And then when the public gives you a backlash, you say, okay, we are not going to do that anymore. Let's spend an additional $40 million. Okay, so obviously we don't have the full details, right? We do not have the full details, at least insofar as who is the one that decided that everyone had to do this? Who made that executive decision? And I'm pretty sure, knowing the bureaucratic system in Singapore, there will be many, many questions asked, many internal investigations that take place, and whoever that ultimately gave the okay and green light for this policy will get into deep, deep, deep trouble, but that's not the point, because the point ultimately is that we are talking about something that is really not necessary, right? And ultimately, what are the outcomes from this? The outcome, simply put, is that you waste a whole bunch of government resources, financial wherewithals that could have gone into, other more crucial social safety nets, right? Or to continue all the government transfers that have been occurring in the past couple of years to mitigate the sudden increase in, the income gap because of, a whole other issue. Basically it's related to influx of high net worth individuals from, other countries. I'm not going to name which one, perhaps we'll unpack this another day, right? Or, yeah, so, as in, don't get me wrong, all these government transfers have been great. Certainly more can be done, but they have helped quite a lot of Singaporeans, I would say, including myself, right? Because as one of the recipients of these government transfers, yes, despite running a tuition business, just to be clear, it's not like I'm super well off, right? It has helped alleviate a lot of the costs of the expenses related to cost of living, spending and expenditures and all that. But then you're gonna tell Singaporeans, hey, let's go and do a system whereby you just tap and then it says SimplyGo there instead of like showing your card balance. And you can't use this card for other things, unlike the old system. And sucks to be you if you don't switch over, right? So the question is just why? Why? Why do we need this? So okay, if you want to use this, then I guess in your essays or even your AQs, right? Obviously, I would use it as an evaluation point. The idea being that despite Singapore's technological advancements, and all our, well-intentioned moves towards creating a smart city, right, and to innovate such that we can improve the overall quality of life and standards of living in Singapore, there are just some things, that are just wholly unnecessary or does not take into account, the sort of daily lives of Singaporeans. Because the thing is that, the SimplyGo transition, and I'm pretty sure this also has something to do with the fact that the ERP gantries in Singapore are also, undergoing a mass upgrade all around. And that's why they decided, hey, some of these cards are obsolete. But just why? Just why? Right? Why do we need to do this? So the evaluation point here essentially that you want to make is that sometimes, right, the government does get it wrong. But at the same time, it also means that we need to learn from all these things, right? Because when it comes to innovation, there is certainly a hard limit for certain kinds of technology, right? Or technology that is meant to I guess alleviate certain quality of life things or standards of living. Because I mean, we had a well-oiled machine, just tap in, tap out, and that worked. why do we need to make changes like this, and then not only create all these backlash, and okay, I know I shouldn't be laughing, but this is just, oh gosh. Okay. Right. I've composed myself, although yeah, it's just we 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 don't need these kinds of innovation if it's just gonna regress in a way. So yeah, and also there's something to take away here, and that's really related to the manner in which all these changes are communicated to the people is just very much like, hey, you're going to transition to this system, nothing you can do about it, just go with it, simply go with it, right? And then of course that elicited responses like simply go yourself, whatever that blank is in between, I'll leave it to your imagination. But yeah, it was just an all-around interesting week, I guess, for Singapore. Lots of material here to mine, if you are trying to draw like satire or political comedies, or write political comedies and all that. But yeah, it's just one of those weeks where, it happens, right? So yeah, of course there are a whole bunch of other things that we certainly can cover, but I thought for this week's episode we would focus on Singapore. And yeah, that's that, for this episode. So of course, if you have any questions you would like to ask, right? Or if let's say you are an international viewer and you want to submit a question, I would love to hear your thoughts, and we can have a discourse, right? Pun fully intended. You can submit your questions to this link here, the discourseeducation.com.sg/TDEP ask A-level GP tuition. Yeah, the reason why the link is so weird is for SEO reasons, although I think I'm gonna change it soon. It sounds very clunky, right? Yeah, and of course follow us on Instagram or TikTok. Although if you're watching this in full, I would say stay away from TikTok, alright? Just watch our stuff here. Instagram, though, certainly do give us a follow there, because we post, content, or I shouldn't say content, but rather we post pictures, of our business operations here. So if you want to see how we conduct our lessons, if you want to see how the environment is like in our classroom, right? And what sort of learning that's going on in this particular center here, do give us a follow there, right? And of course, if you'd like more details on our premium tuition service or services, I guess, not just for general paper, but also for A-levels H2 history, O-levels English, and we are looking into expanding into other subjects soon and other levels, all right? Stay tuned for that. Certainly, hit us up on our website, the discourseeducation.com.sg. And if you have a question on our lessons, feel free to fill in the contact form and we'll get back to you ASAP. Well, it'll probably be just me because, hey, it's a one-man operation here, right? And we can see how we can discuss your learning needs and how we can help you improve and achieve whatever academic goals you are aiming for. So yeah, that's that, all right? That'll be that for this episode. And yeah, Chinese New Year is approaching. Have a good one, all right? Take care of yourselves, and I will see you next week.